Hey everyone, welcome back to Sleepless Survivors. Tonight we're diving into something dark, something unsettling, and something that changed the course of human history forever. We're talking about the Black Death, the plague that swept through medieval Europe and killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people. That's not a typo. Nearly half of Europe's population just gone. But here's the twist. We're not just talking about the Black Death tonight. We're putting you right in the middle of it. What would it actually take to survive? Not the Hollywood version with heroic doctors and miraculous cures, the real version. The one where you're covered in fleas, drinking contaminated water, and watching your neighbours die in the streets while you desperately try to figure out what's causing it. Before we begin, if you enjoy these deep dives into history's darkest moments, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the global Sleepless Survivors community come together. Now get comfortable, maybe grab some water, turn on a fan for that background noise, and let's ease into this journey together. Because tonight, you're not just learning about the Black Death, you're surviving it. Chapter 1. The morning you wake up in 1347. Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1347, in a bustling port city somewhere in southern Europe. Let's say Marseille, France, though it could just as easily be Genoa, Venice, or any of the major trading hubs along the Mediterranean coast. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're about to witness one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, and you have absolutely no idea it's coming. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a straw mattress that hasn't been changed in months. It's lumpy, damp, and crawling with things you'd rather not think about. Bedbugs, fleas, maybe a few beetles. The blanket covering you is made of rough wool that scratches your skin and smells like a combination of sweat, smoke, and something you really hope is just mildew. You blink awake as the church bells ring across the city. It's barely dawn, but the day has already begun. In medieval Europe, there's no such thing as sleeping in. Work starts with the sun, and if you're not up, you're behind. Your home is a narrow wooden building crammed between other narrow wooden buildings, in a neighbourhood where personal space is a luxury reserved for the very rich. The walls are thin. You can hear your neighbours arguing, someone's baby crying, and the sound of a cart rattling past on the cobblestones outside. The air in your room is thick and stale. There's no ventilation to speak of, just a single wooden shutter that you keep closed most of the time because opening it means letting in the smell of the street. And trust me, you don't want that smell in your room any more than it already is. You sit, up slowly, feeling your joints crack and pop. You're only in your late 20s, but your body feels ancient. Years of hard labour, poor nutrition, and sleeping on that terrible mattress have taken their toll. Your back aches, your knees hurt, and you've got a persistent cough that won't go away, though everyone has a cough, so you don't think much of it. As you swing your legs over the side of the bed, your bare feet hit the dirt floor. Yes, dirt. If you're lucky, it's packed earth that's been swept recently. If you're not lucky, it's damp, muddy, and mixed with things you'd rather not identify. You scratch at your scalp absent-mindedly. The itching is constant. Lice. Everyone has them. From the richest merchant to the poorest beggar, lice are just a fact of life. You've tried washing your hair with lye soap, but it barely helps. The little parasites always come back. Looking around your room, you can see your entire worldly possessions in a single glance. A wooden chest containing your one spare set of clothes, a small table with a clay jug for water, a few hooks on the wall holding your work tools. That's it. That's everything you own. Your family's already stirring. Your wife is rekindling the fire in the hearth, blowing on the embers from last night until they glow red again. Your two children, ages 7 and 9, are huddled together on their own straw mattress in the corner. Your mother-in-law, who lives with you because she has nowhere else to go, is coughing wetly in the other corner. Nobody says good morning. There's no cheerful breakfast conversation. Everyone just goes about their morning routine in tired silence, because what is there to say? Yesterday was hard. Today will be hard. Tomorrow will be hard. This is just life. You pull on your tunic, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before and the day before that. It's stained, worn, and starting to develop holes in places, but it's the only one you have. Your work tunic is even worse, but you save that for the docks. As you prepare to face the day, you have no idea that in a few weeks ships will arrive in this very port carrying something invisible, something deadly, something that will change everything. The plague is coming. But today, you're just worried about earning enough money to buy bread. Chapter 2. The Port and the Arrival. You're a dock worker in Marseille, one of the busiest ports in Europe. Every day, ships arrive from all over the Mediterranean, bringing goods, traders, and news from distant lands, spices from the east, silk from Asia, wine from Italy, grain from North Africa. The port is the lifeblood of the city, and you're part of the crew that keeps it running. The walk to the docks takes about 20 minutes, through narrow, winding streets that are already crowded with people even though the sun has barely risen. Merchants setting up their stalls, beggars calling out for alms, prostitutes finishing their night shifts, street vendors selling yesterdays, bread at a discount. The smell is overwhelming. Medieval cities don't have sewers, not really. There are open ditches running down the centre of most streets, filled with a foul mixture of human waste, animal droppings, rotting garbage, and rainwater. When it rains, the streets become rivers of filth. When it doesn't rain, the waste just sits there, baking in the sun, creating a stench so powerful it makes your eyes water. You navigate the streets carefully, trying not to step in anything too disgusting, though it's basically impossible. Everyone is doing the same awkward dance, hopping from one relatively clean spot to another. As you approach the port, the smell changes from general urban filth to something more specific. Fish, salt water, tar, and the distinctive odour of human bodies working hard in close quarters. The docks are already bustling with activity, ships being loaded and unloaded, barrels being rolled, crates being opened, sailors shouting in a dozen different languages. You report to your crew leader, a grizzled man named Jacques, who's been working the docks for 30 years and has the broken fingers to prove it. He assigns you to a team unloading a ship that arrived late last night from the east, a trading galley that's been at sea for months, stopping at ports all along the Mediterranean. Move quick, Jacques says. The captain wants to unload and leave before nightfall, says something about his crew being sick. You don't think much of it. Sailors are always sick. Scurvy, dysentery, fevers. It's what happens when you spend months at sea eating nothing but salted meat and hard bread. You and your crew board the ship and immediately you notice something is off. The deck is eerily quiet. Usually sailors are everywhere, shouting, working, making noise, but this ship feels abandoned. You can see a few crew members, but they're slumped against the railings, looking pale and exhausted. One of them has dark swellings on his neck, visible even from a distance. Large, purple-black lumps that look grotesque and painful. "What's wrong with him?" you ask one of your fellow dock workers. He shrugs. "Some kind of fever, don't get too close." But you have to get close. Your job is to unload the cargo, and that means working alongside these 6 sailors, whether you like it or not. You spend the next several hours hauling crates and barrels from the ship's hold. The cargo is valuable: spices, fabrics, exotic woods. You work quickly, efficiently, trying not to breathe too deeply because the smell below deck is horrific. In the hold you find something disturbing. A dead sailor, his body already starting to decompose in the heat. The same dark swellings cover his neck and armpits. His face is contorted in agony, his mouth frozen open in a silent scream. "Leave him," Jacques orders when you report it. "Just move the cargo. The captain can deal with his own dead." By midday the ship is unloaded. The captain pays Jacques, who distributes coins, to the crew. You pocket your meagre wages and head home, exhausted, hungry and covered in sweat. You don't think about the sick sailors. You don't think about the dead body in the hold. You certainly don't think about the fleas. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Tiny, black, infected fleas that jumped from the dying rats in the ship's hold onto your clothes, into your hair, and are now hitching a ride into the city. You've just helped unleash the Black Death on Europe. But you won't know that for another week. Chapter 3. The First Signs. 5 days later, you start feeling off. Nothing major at first, just tired. More tired than usual. You wake up one morning and you don't want to get out of bed, which is strange because you never have the luxury of staying in bed. Your wife asks if you're all right. You tell her you're fine, just tired. Everyone's always tired. You go to work, but you're moving slower than normal. Your body aches, deep in your bones. You assume it's just from yesterday's labour. You spent 10 hours hauling grain sacks, each one weighing nearly as much as you do. Of course you're sore, but by midday you realise this is different. Your head is pounding, your vision is slightly blurred, and you're cold. freezing cold even though it's a warm October day and everyone else is sweating. You stumble home early, which is dangerous because leaving work early means less pay, but you physically cannot continue. Your legs feel like they're going to give out. When you get home, your wife takes one look at your face and goes pale. "You're burning up," she says, pressing her hand to your forehead. You collapse onto your bed, shivering violently despite the blankets she piles on top of you. The fever hits you like a wall. One moment you're cold, the next you're so hot you think you're going to burst into flames. You're sweating through your clothes, through the blankets, soaking the straw mattress beneath you. Your body aches everywhere. Not just sore muscles, but deep, bone-level pain that makes you want to scream. Your head feels like it's being squeezed in a vice. Your throat is dry and raw. And worst of all, you're starting to feel nauseous, a rolling, churning sensation in your stomach that makes you certain you're about to vomit. Your wife brings you water, but you can barely swallow. She tries to get you to eat some bread, but the thought of food makes the nausea worse. "I'll get the physician," she says, her voice tight with worry. "We can't afford a physician," you croak. "I'll figure it out," she says, and leaves. While she's gone, you drift in and out of consciousness. The fever brings strange dreams, vivid and terrifying. You see the dead sailor from the ship, his mouth open, his eyes staring. You see rats, thousands of them, pouring through the streets. You see darkness creeping in from the edges of your vision, thick and suffocating. When you wake, the physician is there. He's an older man with grey hair and an expression of perpetual annoyance, like he resents being called to your humble home. He's wearing a long robe and carrying a leather bag filled with mysterious tools and bottles. He examines you briefly, barely touching you. He looks at your tongue, feels your forehead, checks your pulse. Then he steps back, frowning. "It's an imbalance of humours," he declares. "Too much black bile. We need to drain the excess." Before you can protest, he pulls out a small sharp blade and a bowl. Bloodletting, the standard medieval treatment for basically everything. He makes a cut on your forearm and blood begins dripping into the bowl. Dark red, thick blood that represents, in his mind, the poison in your system. In reality, you're about to lose blood that your body desperately needs to fight off the infection ravaging your system. After what feels like forever, he binds your arm with a dirty cloth and stands up. "He should rest," he tells your wife. "Give him vinegar water to drink and keep him warm. If the fever breaks, he'll recover. If not..." He doesn't finish the sentence. Your wife pays him with the last of your savings and he leaves. Over the next 2 days, your condition worsens. The fever rages. You can't keep food down. You're too weak to even sit up. Your wife does her best, bringing you water, changing the cloth on your forehead, praying constantly. And then, on the third morning, you notice them. Swellings. Small at first, just tender spots in your armpits and groin. But over the course of a few hours, they grow. They swell up into large, painful lumps the size of eggs. The skin over them turns dark, purple-black, like bruises but worse. These are buboes, the signature symptom of bubonic plague. Though you don't know that name, and you don't understand what they mean, you just know they hurt. They hurt so much you can barely move without crying out. Your wife sees them and starts weeping. She's heard the rumours that have been spreading through the city over the past week. Other dock workers have fallen ill, entire families. The priest mentioned something about a pestilence during Mass. People are starting to whisper about a curse, a punishment from God, a sickness unlike anything they've seen before. You're not the first to fall ill, but you might be one of the first to survive. Because here's the thing about bubonic plague. It has a mortality rate of about 60-70% if untreated. That means roughly 1 in 3 people who catch it will survive, at least the bubonic form. Your body is currently fighting a war at the microscopic level. A war between your immune system and Yersinia pestis, the bacteria causing the plague. You don't know any of this, of course. You just know you're in agony, and you don't know if you'll see tomorrow. Chapter 4. Understanding the enemy. Let's pause your suffering for a moment and talk about what's actually happening inside your body. Because understanding the Black Death means understanding Yersinia pestis, one of the most efficient killers in human history. The bacteria that causes plague is transmitted primarily through fleas, specifically the oriental rat flea, Xenocilla sciopes. These fleas normally live on black rats, Rattus rattus, which were everywhere in medieval Europe. Rats lived in grain stores, in houses, on ships, in the walls. Wherever humans went, rats followed. and wherever rats went, fleas followed. Here's how the infection cycle works. A flea bites an infected rat and ingests the bacteria. The bacteria multiply in the flea's gut until they form a blockage, preventing the flea from digesting any blood meals. The flea becomes desperately hungry and starts biting more frequently, trying to feed. But because its digestive tract is blocked, every time it bites, it regurgitates bacteria-laden blood back into the host. When the rat dies from plague, which happens quickly, the fleas abandon the corpse and look for a new host, and if there are no rats available, they'll happily bite humans instead. Once the bacteria enter your bloodstream through a flea bite, they travel to your lymph nodes, the small organs throughout your body that are part of your immune system. The bacteria multiply rapidly in the lymph nodes, causing them to swell dramatically. These swollen lymph nodes are the buboes that give bubonic plague its name. Without treatment, the bacteria can escape the lymph nodes and enter your bloodstream, spreading throughout your entire body. This is called septicemic plague, and it's almost always fatal. The bacteria produce toxins that can cause tissue death, turning your fingers, toes, and nose black. This is where the name Black Death comes from. In some cases, the bacteria reach your lungs and cause pneumonic plague. This is the most dangerous form because it can spread directly from person to person through coughing, without needing fleas or rats as intermediaries. Pneumonic plague is nearly 100% fatal without modern antibiotics, and death usually occurs within 24-48 hours of symptoms appearing. But in 1347, nobody knows any of this. The germ theory of disease won't be developed for another 500 years. Nobody knows what bacteria are. Nobody understands how infections spread. Nobody has even seen a microscope yet. Instead, medieval physicians operate on the theory of humorism, the ancient idea that health depends on balancing 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When you're sick, they believe it's because these humours are out of balance, and the solution is to restore that balance through bloodletting, purging, or administering various herbs and concoctions. They also believe in miasma theory, the idea that diseases are caused by bad air rising from rotting organic matter, sewage, and corpses. This is why medieval cities smell so bad. There's rotting organic matter everywhere, and to be fair, the miasma theory isn't completely wrong. Areas with poor sanitation do have higher disease rates, just not for the reasons they think. Some physicians and priests believe the plague is divine punishment for humanity's sins. In this view, the sickness is sent directly by God as a form of correction, and the only cure is prayer, repentance, and moral reform. Others think it's caused by astrological phenomena, particularly a conjunction of planets that occurred in 1345. Some blame earthquakes releasing poisonous fumes from the earth. Some point to Jewish communities and accuse them of poisoning wells, leading to horrific pogroms across Europe. Everyone has a theory. Nobody has the right answer. And because nobody understands what's actually causing the disease, nobody can effectively prevent it or treat it. Medieval medicine is almost entirely useless against the Black Death. In fact, some treatments actively make things worse. Bloodletting weakens patients who need all their strength to fight the infection. Covering patients with heavy blankets to sweat out the fever raises their body temperature even more, potentially causing seizures. Housing multiple sick family members together increases transmission. The few things that do help are mostly accidental. Some Italian cities implement quarantine measures, isolating sick individuals and requiring ships to wait 40 days before unloading cargo. This helps slow the spread, even though they don't understand why. People who flee crowded cities for the countryside have a better chance of survival, simply because they're avoiding infected fleas and people. But most people don't have the option to flee. Most people are stuck in crowded cities with infected rats, infected fleas, infected neighbours, and no idea what's killing them or how to stop it. Which brings us back to you, lying in your bed, covered in buboes, burning with fever, and trying desperately to survive. Chapter 5. The city begins to fall. You spend 5 days in feverish agony. The buboes in your armpits and groin have swollen to the size of small apples, dark and angry. Every movement is torture. Your wife has to help you drink water because you're too weak to lift the cup yourself. But on the 6th day, something changes. The fever breaks. Just slightly, but enough that you can think clearly for the first time in days. The buboes are still there, still painful, but they don't seem to be getting worse. One of them has actually started to drain on its own. leaking pus and blood onto the cloth your wife has packed around it. The crisis is passing, your wife says, and you can hear the relief in her voice. She's been sitting vigil next to your bed for nearly a week, barely sleeping, probably not eating enough. She looks exhausted, but she's smiling. Your mother-in-law is not as fortunate. 3 days after you fell ill, she started showing symptoms. The same fever, the same buboes. But she's older, weaker, and her body can't fight as hard. You can hear her coughing in the corner, wet, rattling coughs that sound like death. She dies on your 7th day of illness. Quietly, while everyone is asleep. When your wife wakes and goes to check on her, she's simply gone. Her eyes are still open, staring at nothing. Her mouth is slack. The buboes on her neck have turned almost black. Your wife weeps silently as she wraps the body in a sheet. There's no time for proper mourning. The city has implemented new rules. Bodies must be removed quickly to prevent further spread of disease. She goes to report the death to the local church, and by afternoon, men arrive with a cart to take the body away. They're wearing cloth masks soaked in vinegar, believing it will protect them from the bad air. It won't, but you don't know that. They handle your mother-in-law's body roughly, without ceremony, and toss it onto a cart that already contains 3 other corpses. Then they're gone, heading to the mass burial pits that have been dug outside the city walls. Your wife returns home and immediately scrubs her hands with harsh lye soap, scrubbing until her skin is red and raw. She's terrified of catching the disease. So far she seems fine. The children seem fine. But every morning she checks them for fever, for swellings, for any sign that the sickness has spread. As you slowly recover, you begin to hear stories from the outside world. The plague has spread throughout the city. The docks have shut down completely because so many workers are dead or dying. Markets are empty because farmers are afraid to bring goods into the city. Churches are overwhelmed with funeral masses, sometimes conducting dozens per day. Your neighbour, a baker, is dead. So is his wife. Their 3 children are orphans now, taken in by a distant relative who probably doesn't have enough food to feed them. The merchant who lives 2 streets over is dead. The blacksmith who repaired your tools is dead. The priest who married you and your wife is dead, along with 2 other priests from the same church. Dead, dead, dead. The word echoes constantly. The city authorities have tried to implement various measures to stop the spread. They've ordered all cats and dogs to be killed, believing they're spreading the disease. This is exactly the wrong thing to do because cats and dogs hunt rats, and killing them allows the rat population to explode. But nobody realises this. They've banned public gatherings and closed the taverns. They've required all waste to be disposed of outside the city walls. They've even expelled beggars and vagrants, believing that the unclean poor are the source of the contagion. Nothing works. The death toll keeps rising. By the 2nd week of the outbreak, the city has lost approximately 15% of its population. By the end of the 1st month, it will be 30%. And the plague isn't slowing down. It's speeding up, spreading exponentially as more people become infected, and more fleas find new hosts. Your survival puts you in a strange position. You're one of the lucky ones, part of the 30-40% who contract bubonic plague and live. But your survival also means you're now expected to help. The city is desperate for people who can bury the dead, care for the sick, and keep basic services running. You're still weak. The buboes have drained and started healing, leaving terrible scars, but you can barely walk without pain. Yet there's no time to fully recover. Your family needs money, the city needs workers, and there are bodies everywhere that need to be dealt with. So you go back to work, not to the docks, those are closed, but to the burial crews. It's grim work, the worst you've ever done, but it pays double wages because nobody else wants to do it. You and a crew of other survivors, all of you marked by scars from the buboes, spend your days collecting corpses. You go house to house, knocking on doors. Sometimes people answer and point you to a body in the back room. Sometimes nobody answers, and you have to break down the door to find entire families dead inside. The carts are always full. The burial pits are always open. You work from dawn to dusk, covering your face with vinegar-soaked cloth, trying not to breathe too deeply, trying not to think about the fact that every corpse you touch could be carrying infected fleas. But here's the thing. You've already had the plague, and from what people are observing, those who survive don't seem to get sick again. You have immunity now, though you don't understand the mechanism. Your body has produced antibodies against Yersinia pestis, and those antibodies will protect you for years, possibly for life. This makes you valuable. This makes you one of the few people who can move freely through the city without fear. And so you work. You survive. You watch your city collapse around you, one body at a time. Chapter 6. The symptoms you learn to recognize. After weeks of working with the dead and dying, you become an expert in the progression of plague. You can spot the signs before most people even realize they're sick. You learn to recognize the early symptoms, the ones that appear in the first day or two. The fever comes first. Always the fever. A sudden, spiking temperature that makes people shiver violently even on warm days. You've seen grown men curled up in bed, teeth chattering, wrapped in every blanket they own. Then comes the headache. Not a mild discomfort, but a crushing, blinding pain that makes people vomit from the intensity. Some describe it as feeling like their skull is being crushed in a vice. Body aches follow. Deep penetrating pain in the muscles and joints. People can barely move. Getting out of bed becomes an act of will. Within 24-48 hours, the buboes appear. These swellings usually show up in the lymph nodes closest to the flea bite. If you were bitten on the leg, you'll get buboes in your groin. If on the arm, in your armpit. Sometimes on the neck, behind the ears, or even under the jaw. The buboes start small, maybe the size of an almond. But they grow rapidly, swelling to the size of an egg, or even a small apple. The skin over them becomes dark, purplish black. They're excruciatingly painful. Some people can't even wear clothes because any pressure on the buboes makes them scream. In some cases, the buboes burst open on their own, leaking pus, blood, and tissue. This is actually a good sign. If the bubo drains naturally, the patient has a better chance of survival. The body is expelling the infected material. Medieval physicians, in their desperation, sometimes try to treat buboes by lancing them with knives or applying hot poultices to draw out the infection. Sometimes this helps by encouraging drainage. Other times, it just introduces new infections into an already compromised body. But bubonic plague isn't the only form you encounter. You start recognizing pneumonic plague as well, the variant that attacks the lungs. This one is somehow worse, somehow more terrifying. Pneumonic plague starts similarly. Fever, aches, headache. But instead of buboes, the patient develops a severe cough. At first, it's dry and painful, but within hours it becomes productive, bringing up bloody, frothy sputum. The patient's chest fills with fluid. They struggle to breathe, gasping, drowning in their own lungs. Pneumonic plague victims die quickly, usually within 2-3 days of symptom onset. And unlike bubonic plague, pneumonic plague spreads directly from person to person. A single cough can release thousands of bacteria into the air. Anyone in the room is at risk. You learn to recognize pneumonic plague immediately, and you learn to avoid it. Even with your immunity to bubonic plague, you're not sure if it extends to the pneumonic form. You're not willing to test it. Then there's septicemic plague, the rarest but most lethal form. This happens when the bacteria enter the bloodstream directly without forming buboes. The patient gets the fever and aches, but no swellings appear. Instead, their skin begins to turn black, starting at the extremities. Fingers, toes, nose, ears. The tissue dies and turns gangrenous. These patients always die. Always. Usually within 24 hours of the blackening starting. There's something especially horrifying about watching someone's body literally rot while they're still alive. The smell alone is unbearable. You also learn to recognize the behavioral changes that come with plague. Many patients become delirious from the fever. They hallucinate, seeing demons or angels. They thrash and scream. Some try to run away, convinced they're being chased. You have to restrain them, tie them to beds to keep them from hurting themselves or others. Some become catatonic, staring at nothing, unresponsive. These patients are often close to death. The body is shutting down, and then there are the emotional responses. Some people become resigned, accepting death with calm dignity. Others rage against it, screaming curses at God, demanding to know why they're being punished. Parents beg you to save their children. Spouses refuse to leave the bedsides of dying loved ones, even when you warn them they'll catch the disease. You see every human emotion laid bare. Fear, anger, sorrow, denial, acceptance. Love so strong that people willingly embrace death rather than abandon their families. After a few weeks, you become numb to it. You have to. If you let yourself feel the full weight of what you're witnessing, you'll collapse under the grief. So you build walls. You stop learning names. You stop looking at faces. You just see bodies. Work to be done. But sometimes, late at night, when you're back in your own home with your wife and children sleeping peacefully beside you, the walls crack, and you weep silently, mourning thousands of strangers whose faces you've forgotten but whose deaths will haunt you forever. Chapter 7. The Desperate Measures. As the death toll climbs, the city becomes a place of desperate, bizarre, and often counterproductive measures. Fear makes people irrational. When they can't control the disease, they grasp at anything that offers even the illusion of hope. The flagellants arrive in the second month. These are religious zealots who believe the plague is divine punishment for sin, and the only way to stop it is through public penance. They travel in groups of 2,300, dressed in hooded robes, carrying whips. You see them marching through the streets at dawn, chanting prayers. They stop in the town square, form a circle, and begin beating themselves. Not symbolically, violently. They strip to the waist and use whips embedded with metal spikes to flay their own backs until blood runs down in rivulets. They believe their suffering will convince God to end the plague, that their blood will wash away humanity's sins. The crowd watches in horrified fascination. Some people join in, taking up whips, adding their own blood to the spectacle. Children cry. Priests try to intervene, declaring the flagellants heretical, but they're ignored. The flagellants move from city to city, and everywhere they go they spread the plague. Turns out that gathering hundreds of people in close quarters, many of them already infected, and then having them move to new locations is an excellent way to transmit disease. But they believe they're immune, protected by their holy suffering. They're not. Then there are the scapegoats. Humans have always needed someone to blame when things go wrong, and the Black Death is no exception. Jewish communities are accused of poisoning wells, deliberately spreading the plague to kill Christians. It's absurd, of course. Jews are dying from plague at the same rates as everyone else, but fear doesn't require logic. Pogroms sweep across Europe. Jewish neighbourhoods are attacked. Families are dragged from their homes. Synagogues are burned. In some cities, entire Jewish populations are massacred. Thousands killed, not by plague, but by neighbours who need someone to punish. You witness one of these attacks. You're collecting bodies near the Jewish quarter when you hear screaming. A mob has formed, armed with clubs and torches. They're breaking down doors, dragging people into the streets. You and your crew retreat. There's nothing you can do. The mob is too large, too frenzied. You watch from a distance as homes burn and people die, and you hate yourself for your cowardice. But what can one exhausted gravedigger do against 100 angry rioters? Other groups are targeted too. Lepers, beggars, foreigners, Roma. Anyone who's already marginalised becomes a suspect. The city's social fabric tears apart under the strain. Meanwhile, the wealthy try to buy their way to safety. They flee the cities for rural estates, taking their families and servants with them. Some survive by isolating themselves. Others bring infected servants with them and simply spread the plague to the countryside. Those who stay hire doctors at exorbitant rates. These physicians dress in bizarre outfits, long waxed coats, leather gloves, and most famously bird-like masks with long beaks stuffed with herbs and flowers. They believe the aromatic substances will filter the bad air and protect them from infection. The beak masks become iconic, terrifying symbols of the plague. When you see a figure in a black coat and bird mask approaching, you know death isn't far behind. These doctors try everything. They prescribe powdered emeralds for the wealthy. They recommend sitting between two large fires to cleanse the air. They suggest eating only cold foods, or only warm foods, or no foods at all. They drain blood until patients are too weak to stand. They administer purges that cause violent diarrhea, dehydrating patients who are already critically ill. One treatment that gains popularity is the application of live chickens to buboes. The theory is that the chicken will draw out the poison. The practice involves cutting open a live chicken and pressing its internal organs against the swelling. Unsurprisingly, this doesn't work. All it does is torture chickens and probably introduce new infections. Some doctors prescribe arsenic, mercury, or powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk. They create complex theriac, a mixture of dozens of ingredients including opium, snake flesh, and powdered viper, claim to cure everything. It cures nothing. Religious responses proliferate. Special masses are held constantly. Priests carry relics through the streets, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, vials of holy water. Processions wind through plague-ravaged neighbourhoods, believers praying that divine intervention will save them. Some clergy are genuinely heroic. They stay with the dying when everyone else flees. They administer last rites, offer comfort, organise aid for orphans. Many of these brave priests die themselves, infected while caring for their flock. Others are less admirable. Some priests refuse to enter plague houses, conducting abbreviated funerals from a safe distance. Some demand exorbitant fees for last rites, exploiting desperate families. Some simply flee, abandoning their parishes entirely. Churches become overcrowded as people seek salvation through prayer. Hundreds pack into small spaces, kneeling shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air. If pneumonic plague is present, these gatherings become death traps. You watch all of this with growing cynicism. None of it works. Not the flagellation, not the scapegoating, not the expensive doctors, not the prayers. People keep dying at the same relentless pace regardless of what measures are tried. The only things that seem to help are the simplest: isolation and time. Families that lock themselves in their homes and refuse visitors sometimes emerge unscathed weeks later. Ships that are quarantined in the harbour eventually clear of infection. The disease burns through communities and then, having killed or infected everyone susceptible, moves on. But these lessons are learned slowly, inconsistently, and they require a level of social organisation that's breaking down rapidly. When half the government officials are dead, when the social order is collapsing, when people are too terrified to think clearly, simple public health measures become impossible to implement. You continue your grim work, collecting bodies, digging pits, watching your city die one person at a time, and hoping desperately that your wife and children remain safe. Chapter 8. The breakdown of order. By the third month, Marseille is no longer functioning as a city. It's barely functioning at all. The social systems that hold civilization together are collapsing under the weight of mass death. The docks are closed. Ships sit anchored in the harbour, their crews dead or fled. Goods rot in warehouses because there's nobody to unload them, nobody to buy them, nobody to sell them. Markets are nearly empty. The few vendors who still operate charge outrageous prices because supply chains have broken down. Bread that cost 1 coin 2 months ago now costs 5. Farmers are afraid to bring produce into the city, fearing infection. Those who do come are often robbed by desperate, hungry mobs. You've been surviving on your wages from the burial crews, but even that's becoming uncertain. The city government is running out of money to pay workers. Some weeks you get your full wages, other weeks, half. 1 week, nothing at all. Your wife has been resourceful. She's started trading work for food, mending clothes for a neighbour in exchange for vegetables, helping a widow haul water in exchange for bread. Your children have become expert scavengers, finding edible scraps in places you'd never think to look. But it's getting harder. Food is scarce, and what food exists is often contaminated. Without proper storage, without salt for preservation, things spoil quickly. You've eaten mouldy bread, questionable meat, vegetables that were more rot than food. Your stomach is in constant turmoil, but what choice do you have? Law enforcement has essentially ceased to exist. The City Watch, never large to begin with, has lost most of its members to plague. Those who remain are overwhelmed and often corrupt. Crime is rampant. Looters break into abandoned homes and businesses, taking anything of value. You've seen them at work, smashing windows, carrying out furniture, clothes, food, whatever they can carry. Nobody stops them. There's nobody to stop them. Worse are the gangs that have formed. Groups of young men, often orphaned by the plague, who roam the streets at night. They rob, assault, sometimes kill. The city is too chaotic to pursue them. You start carrying a knife everywhere. So does your wife. You board up your windows at night and push furniture against the door. You sleep lightly, always listening for the sound of footsteps outside. Violence erupts unpredictably. You witness a fight over a loaf of bread that turns into a killing. 2 men arguing over the price escalates until one pulls a knife and stabs the other. The attacker runs, the victim bleeds out in the street. Nobody helps him. Everyone's too afraid or too numb. You see a woman being assaulted in an alley. Part of you wants to intervene, but you have a family to protect. If you get injured or killed helping a stranger, what happens to your wife and children? So you keep walking, hating yourself, but unable to see another choice. The wealthy, or those who were wealthy, barricade themselves in their homes. They hire armed guards, Mercenaries who are paid in food and valuables, these private armies defend their employers' property and sometimes venture out to seize resources from weaker households. Class resentment boils over. The poor, who've always suffered more, who live in the most crowded conditions with the least resources, are dying at even higher rates than usual. They blame the rich for fleeing, for hoarding, for not doing more to help. Some mansions are stormed by angry mobs. You witness one such attack. Dozens of people with improvised weapons, hammers, pitchforks, clubs, overwhelm the guards and break into a wealthy merchant's home. They ransack the place, taking food, wine, silver, anything they can carry. The merchant and his family are dragged into the street. You don't stay to see what happens next. You already know. The merchant is probably dead within minutes, beaten or stabbed by people who blame him for their suffering. His wife, his children. You don't want to think about it. Bodies lie uncollected in the streets now. There aren't enough burial crews to keep up with demand. The mass graves are full. New ones need to be dug, but workers are exhausted, sick, or dead themselves. The smell of death hangs over the entire city. It's inescapable. A thick, sweet, rotting odour that clings to your clothes, your hair, the inside of your nose. You can taste it when you eat. You smell it when you sleep. It's driving people mad. Some bodies are simply left where they fall, in doorways, in alleys, sometimes in the middle of major streets. Rats feast on them. Dogs too, until most of the dogs were killed on the belief they spread disease. Now it's just rats growing fat on human flesh, their populations exploding. You see more rats than people now. They scurry everywhere, bold and fearless. They've learned that humans are weak, dying, no longer a threat. They invade homes openly. You've woken up more than once to find rats on your bed, investigating you and your family like you're just another food source. Your wife killed one with a stick last week. Then she burned it, believing the rats carry the disease. She's not wrong, though not in the way she thinks. It's not the rats themselves, but their fleas. But that distinction doesn't matter much in practical terms. The church bells, which rang constantly in the early days of the plague, announcing death after death, have mostly stopped. Some bell towers stand empty, their priests dead. Others ring only occasionally, a mournful reminder that the city still technically exists. You attend church less frequently now. Your faith, never particularly strong, has been eroded by months of watching innocent people die horrible deaths. Where is God in all this? Why would a loving deity allow such suffering? You don't have answers, and the priests who survive seem just as confused as everyone else. Some preach that this is the end times, the apocalypse described in the book of Revelation. Some claim it's a test of faith. Others have abandoned theology entirely and simply beg God for mercy. You don't know what you believe anymore. You just know you're tired. Bone-deep tired. Tired of death, of fear, of hunger, of uncertainty. Tired of waking up every morning wondering if today is the day your wife or children will show symptoms, but you keep going, because what else can you do? Chapter 9. The long winter arrives, and with it, a small mercy. The plague spread slows, not because of anything humans do, but because of the cold. Fleas are less active in winter, rats stay in their nests more. The disease doesn't disappear, but the exponential growth stops. People dare to hope that the worst is over. Maybe the plague will die out completely when spring comes. Maybe life will return to normal. You know better. You've seen too much to believe in easy endings. But even you feel a small flutter of hope when weeks pass without massive spikes in death rates. Food remains scarce. The harvest was poor. Too many farmers died. Too many fields went untended. Grain prices are astronomical. Your family survives on thin porridge, watered-down soup, and whatever your wife can barter or scavenge. Your daughter, 9 years old, has become worryingly thin. You can see her ribs. Her face is gaunt. She complains less often now, which is somehow more concerning than when she used to whine about being hungry. It's like she's given up expecting food. Your son, 7, has developed a persistent cough. Not the wet, bloody cough of pneumonic plague, thank God. Just a dry, hacking cough from malnutrition and living in a cold, damp house. You give him the largest portions you can, but it's never enough. Your wife has aged a decade in these few months. Her hair, which used to be dark and glossy, is now streaked with grey. Her hands are rough and cracked from constant washing. She's obsessed with cleanliness, convinced it will keep the plague away. Her eyes have a haunted quality, like she's seen things no person should see, which of course she has. You all have. The city's population has been devastated. Of the approximately 25,000 people who lived in Marseille when the plague arrived, perhaps 15,000 are dead. Some estimates run higher. Streets that used to be crowded are now nearly empty. Entire neighbourhoods have been abandoned. You walk through these ghost districts sometimes, on your way to burial sites. Houses stand empty, doors hanging open, possessions scattered. You can see where people fled in panic, leaving everything behind, clothes on floors, dishes on tables, children's toys abandoned mid-play. In one house, you find a family frozen in death. A mother, father, and 3 children, all lying in bed together. They must have died within hours of each other. The mother's arms are still wrapped around the smallest child. Nobody reported their deaths. Nobody came to collect them. They've been here for weeks, maybe months, slowly decomposing. You report the location to the burial crews, but you're not sure anyone will come. There are so many dead, and so few workers. Priorities have to be set. Bodies in the streets get collected first. Bodies in homes can wait, sometimes indefinitely. Work has become irregular. Some days there's plenty to do, bodies to collect, graves to dig, buildings to clear. Other days, nothing. The city has run out of money to pay for proper burial operations. You're often paid in food now instead of coins. A day's work earns you a loaf of bread or a small sack of grain. It's not enough. It's never enough. But you take it because the alternative is starving. You've considered leaving the city, just taking your family and fleeing to the countryside, trying to find a village that wasn't hit as hard. But where would you go? You have no connections outside Marseille, no family in rural areas, no skills beyond dock work and corpse hauling, and the roads are dangerous. Bandits prey on refugees, desperate people who've lost everything and will kill for a loaf of bread. You've heard stories of entire families murdered on the road, their bodies left for the crows. So you stay, you endure, you survive another day, and then another, and then another. The church, what's left of it, holds a special mass on Christmas. You attend, more out of habit than faith. The cathedral, which used to be packed on holy days, is less than a quarter full. The bishop is dead. The priest conducting the service is young, probably elevated to his position only because everyone senior to him died. He speaks about hope, about resurrection, about how God tests the faithful but never abandons them. You want to believe him. You want to feel that hope, that certainty that everything happens for a reason and there's a divine plan. But when you look around at the hollow-eyed survivors, at the children who'll never smile again, at the empty spaces where loved ones should be sitting, you can't find that faith. If this is God's plan, then God is crueler than any plague. Still, you bow your head during prayers. You mouth the familiar Latin words. You take communion, the wafer dry on your tongue. Because even if you've lost faith in God, you haven't lost faith in the idea of faith. Maybe that's enough. Winter drags on. Cold, dark, hungry. Your family huddles together for warmth. Your children sleep between you and your wife, their small bodies pressed against yours. You tell them stories to distract them from their empty stomachs, tales of heroes and adventures, of a better world that exists somewhere far away from this plague-ravaged city. Your daughter asks you one night, "When will things be normal again?" You don't have an answer. You're not sure there is an answer. Normal is gone. The world before the plague might as well be a dream. All you can do is survive this new reality and hope that someday, somehow, something better emerges from the ashes. Soon, you lie, kissing her forehead. Soon. Chapter 10. Spring and False Hope. When spring arrives, the plague roars back. The warmer weather brings increased flea activity, and with it, a new wave of infections. People who thought they were safe, who made it through the winter untouched, suddenly fall ill. It's demoralizing. After months of horror, after surviving the worst winter of your life, to watch it all begin again. The death carts roll through streets, the burial pits reopen, the few remaining physicians don their bird masks and make their rounds, offering false hope at inflated prices. But something is different this time. The plague, while still deadly, doesn't spread as explosively as it did in those first months. Partly this is because there are simply fewer people to infect. The most vulnerable have already died. Those who remain are either naturally resistant or have survived infection and gained immunity. Partly it's because people have learned, in small ways, how to protect themselves. Families isolate more quickly when someone falls ill. People avoid crowds instinctively. The sick are quarantined more effectively. These measures aren't based on understanding of germ theory, but on practical observation. Staying away from sick people keeps you safer. You continue your work with the burial crews, though the work is less constant than before. Some days you're not needed at all. You've started taking on other jobs to supplement your income. You help repair buildings damaged during the chaos. You haul goods for merchants trying to restart trade. Anything to earn food for your family. Your wife has become a midwife of sorts. So, many midwives died that the few women with any experience are in high demand. She's assisted with several births, helping terrified young mothers bring new life into this death-scarred world. Each birth feels like a small victory, a defiant assertion that humanity will continue despite the plague's best efforts. Your wife comes home from these deliveries exhausted, but with a light in her eyes that's been missing for months. Your children are showing signs of recovery. With spring comes more food. Gardens are planted. Farmers, what's left of them, bring produce to market. Prices are still high, but not as impossibly expensive as they were in winter. Your daughter gains back some weight. Her cheeks fill out a little. She starts playing again, not with the carefree joy of before the plague, but playing nonetheless. She's invented a game with pebbles that she plays with other survivor children in the street. They're a quiet group, these plague orphans and near orphans, their games subdued and serious. Your son's cough improves. He's still small for his age, still too thin, but he's stronger. He's started helping you with small tasks, carrying tools, holding ropes. He doesn't complain. None of the children complain anymore. They've learned that complaints don't change anything. The city is slowly, painfully trying to rebuild. The government, what's left of it, has appointed new officials to replace the dead. They're attempting to restore order, to get markets functioning again, to clear the massive backlog of uncollected bodies and waste. It's an enormous task. Streets are filled with refuse from months of neglect. Buildings are damaged and abandoned. Infrastructure has collapsed. The sewer systems, rudimentary to begin with, are completely overwhelmed. Work crews are organised. You join one that's tasked with clearing and cleaning streets in your district. It's gruelling work. You shovel waste, drag debris, sometimes uncover bodies that have been lying hidden for months. The smell is indescribable. Months of rot, waste and death baked under the sun. You work with cloth tied around your face, but it barely helps. You retch constantly. Everyone does. But you keep working because the city is paying in grain, and grain means your family eats. Slowly, the streets begin to look less like an apocalyptic wasteland and more like a city again. Damaged buildings are torn down or repaired. Markets reopen with more regularity. The church bells ring for services, not just for deaths. Trade begins to resume. Ships arrive at the port cautiously, carrying cargo from areas that were spared the worst of the plague. Merchants who fled to the countryside begin returning, assessing the damage, calculating whether there's profit to be made in rebuilding. There's opportunity in the aftermath. With so many people dead, labour is scarce and therefore valuable. Workers can demand higher wages. Peasants can negotiate better terms with landlords. The rigid social hierarchy that existed before the plague is destabilising. You hear stories of serfs abandoning their lords' estates and seeking work elsewhere, knowing they can't be easily replaced. Of craftsmen demanding double their old wages and getting it. Of women taking on trades that were formerly reserved for men simply because there aren't enough men left. It's a strange silver lining to an unimaginable tragedy. The plague has been a great leveller. It killed rich and poor, young and old, faithful and skeptic. And in doing so, it's reshuffled the social deck in ways that might take generations to fully understand. But for now, you're not thinking about long-term social changes. You're thinking about getting through today. About earning enough to feed your family. About keeping everyone healthy. About holding on to the fragile hope that the worst is truly behind you. Summer arrives, hot and oppressive. The plague continues, but at a much reduced rate. Instead of dozens dying per day, it's maybe 1 or 2. Still tragic, but no longer apocalyptic. You begin to believe that your family might actually make it, that you'll all survive this, that you'll have a future beyond mere survival. It's a dangerous hope. You've learned not to trust good fortune, but you let yourself feel it anyway, just a little, because without hope, even false hope, there's nothing worth surviving for. Chapter 11. The economic collapse and adaptation. As summer progresses, the full scope of the plague's economic impact becomes clear. Marseille's economy, like that of cities across Europe, has been utterly shattered. The intricate web of trade, production and services that kept society functioning has been torn apart. The most immediate problem is labour. Before the plague, there were workers for every job, often too many workers competing for too few positions. Employers could pay low wages because workers were replaceable. If you didn't like your job or your pay, someone else would take it gladly. Now, the situation is reversed. Workers are scarce. Entire professions have been decimated. The master carpenter who employed 6 apprentices, dead, along with 4 of his apprentices. The merchant guild that regulated trade, most of its members are dead. The port authority that organised shipping, nearly wiped out. This creates opportunity for those who survive. You're no longer just a day labourer competing with dozens of others for work. You're a skilled survivor in a market desperate for anyone capable of doing physical labour. When you approach a merchant about work, he doesn't haggle over wages. He offers you twice what you would have earned before the plague, and when you hesitate, he raises the offer. He's desperate. He has goods that need moving, ships that need unloading, and almost no one to do the work. You accept, though part of you feels guilty taking such high wages when you know his business is struggling. But your family needs to eat, and you've learned that sentimentality doesn't fill empty stomachs. Your wife experiences a similar shift. As one of the few women in the city with midwifery experience, she can charge premium rates for her services. Families pay whatever she asks because the alternative is attempting childbirth with no help at all, which often ends in death for mother, child or both. But the economic changes aren't all positive. Many industries have simply ceased to exist. Luxury goods, no market. Who's buying silk and spices when they're worried about basic survival? The fancy merchants who dealt in exotic imports have lost everything. Food production is in crisis. The countryside was hit hard by plague, maybe even harder than cities in some areas. Entire villages were wiped out. Fields went unplanted or unharvested. Livestock wandered untended and many died. The farms that survived can't produce enough to feed the remaining urban population. And because labour is scarce, farmers are demanding higher prices for their goods. This creates inflation. The cost of basic necessities rises dramatically. A loaf of bread that cost 1 coin before the plague cost 3 coins now. Meat, always expensive, becomes almost unaffordable for anyone but the wealthy. Your family eats meat perhaps once a month if you're lucky. The government tries to control prices through edicts and regulations. They declare that wages cannot rise above pre-plague levels. That food must be sold at fair prices. These laws are universally ignored. Workers refuse to work for low wages when they can easily find better pay elsewhere. Farmers refuse to sell food below market rates when they know buyers will pay more. The black market flourishes. Goods are traded secretly, outside official channels, at whatever prices the market will bear. You participate in this economy because you have no choice. Official markets are empty or overpriced. The black market, while expensive, at least has food available. You trade services for goods when possible. You help a farmer repair his fence in exchange for vegetables. Your wife delivers a baby for a baker who pays in bread. Your children scavenge firewood and sell it to neighbours who can't gather their own. It's a return to a more primitive economy, based on barter and personal relationships rather than money and markets. In some ways, it's more honest. You know where your food comes from. You know who made your clothes. Everything is local, personal, immediate. The wealthy, or those who were wealthy, struggle with this new reality. Their wealth was often tied up in assets that have become worthless. Luxury goods nobody wants. Properties in plague-devastated areas. Loans to people who are now dead. You hear about a prominent merchant who owned 5 houses before the plague. Now, with the population so reduced, there's no demand for housing. His properties sit empty. He can't sell them. He can't rent them. They're effectively worthless. He's gone from being one of the city's richest men to barely scraping by. Meanwhile, a former labourer who survived and learned carpentry is now in high demand. He can charge premium rates for his work. He's buying property at rock-bottom prices from desperate sellers. He's accumulating wealth and status that would have been impossible before the plague. The social order is being inverted. The plague doesn't care about class or status. It killed indiscriminately. And in the aftermath, survival skills matter more than inherited wealth. Churches are struggling financially. They relied on donations from parishioners, many of whom are now dead. They owned properties and farms, many of which are now abandoned or underproductive. The reduced population means reduced income, even as the demand for religious services, funerals, masses, blessings, remains high. Some churches close entirely, unable to afford priests or maintenance. Their buildings fall into disrepair. Religious artifacts are sold to cover debts. The government faces similar problems. Tax revenue has plummeted because there are fewer people to tax, and those who remain are struggling financially. Yet the need for government services, maintaining order, organising reconstruction, managing public health, has never been greater. Officials get creative. They impose new taxes on everything imaginable. Taxes on windows, taxes on chimneys, taxes on wheels, taxes on sales, on inheritances, on the transfer of property. Everyone grumbles, but everyone pays, because the alternative is complete social collapse. You pay your share, resentfully. The government that abandoned you during the worst of the plague now demands money for reconstruction. But you understand the logic. Society needs infrastructure. Roads need repair. Bridges need maintenance. The harbour needs to be functional for trade to resume. Slowly, painfully, the economy begins to stabilise. Not to return to its pre-plague state, that's impossible, but to find a new equilibrium. Prices remain high, but stop rising. Wages remain elevated, but stabilise. Supply chains, damaged but not destroyed, begin functioning again. Trade routes reopen. Ships from Spain and Italy bring goods. Merchants, recognising opportunity, begin investing in the recovery. Money flows back into the city. You feel this in small ways. More variety at markets, more jobs available, more coins in your pocket at the end of the week. It's not prosperity, not yet, but it's movement in the right direction. Your family's situation improves incrementally. You can afford better food. Your children get new clothes, simple but functional. Your wife trades for a better cooking pot to replace the cracked one you've been using. These small improvements feel like luxuries after months of deprivation. A full stomach, a patch-free shirt, a cooking pot that doesn't leak. You don't take these things for granted anymore. You've learned what it's like to have nothing, and you'll never forget. Chapter 12. The Psychological Scars. While the physical wounds of the plague slowly heal, the cities rebuild, trade resumes, population stabilises, the psychological wounds run deeper and last longer. Everyone who survives carries trauma, though that word won't be coined for centuries. You have nightmares. Nearly every night, you dream of bodies stacked in carts, of mass graves overflowing, of your wife and children covered in buboes, dying while you stand helpless. You wake gasping, soaked in sweat, your heart racing. Your wife holds you, whispers that it's over, that everyone is safe. But the dreams always return. Your children have changed in ways that break your heart. Your daughter used to be bright and curious, constantly asking questions, laughing at everything. Now she's quiet, cautious. She doesn't laugh anymore. She watches everything with suspicious, calculating eyes, like she's constantly assessing danger. Your son startles easily. A loud noise makes him flinch and look for escape routes. He hoards food under his mattress, hiding away bits of bread and dried fruit. You've tried to tell him he doesn't need to hoard, that there will always be enough food, but he doesn't believe you. He lived through months of hunger. Words can't erase that memory. Your wife barely sleeps. She lies awake most nights, listening for sounds of illness. If one of the children coughs, she's immediately alert, checking for fever, examining them by candlelight for any sign of buboes. You've told her she needs to rest, but she can't let go of the vigilance that kept your family alive. Throughout the city, everyone is damaged in similar ways. You see it in how people interact. Nobody crowds together anymore. Even in markets, people maintain distance, unconsciously creating space between themselves and others. The plague taught everyone that proximity means danger. Touch has become suspect. Before the plague, you might greet a friend with an embrace or a handshake. Now, people nod from a distance. Even couples who lost spouses and remarried seem uncomfortable with physical intimacy, as if their bodies remember that touch can kill. Trust has eroded. People are suspicious of strangers, of foreigners, of anyone who seems different. The plague could be anywhere, carried by anyone. This paranoia manifests in ugly ways. Continued persecution of minority groups, hostility toward travellers, reluctance to help those in need. You witness a scene that encapsulates this new reality. A family of travellers arrives in the city, refugees from a nearby town. They're obviously suffering, dirty and hungry, with children crying from exhaustion. They beg for food and shelter. The city residents drive them away with stones and curses. "We don't want your plague," someone shouts. The travellers flee, and you hear later that they were turned away from every nearby town, forced to camp in the wilderness, where they probably died of exposure or starvation. You didn't throw stones, but you didn't help either. And that passivity, that failure to act, eats at you. The plague has made everyone less human, less compassionate. Survival required hardness, and that hardness doesn't disappear just because the immediate danger has passed. There's also survivor's guilt. Why did you live when so many others died? What made you special? Nothing, really. Just luck. The particular strain of bacteria, the location of the flea bite, the quirks of your immune system. Pure chance. But that randomness is hard to accept. Some survivors turn to religion, convinced they were spared for a divine purpose. They become intensely pious, attending every mass, performing elaborate penances, dedicating their lives to holy work. They need to believe their survival means something. Others turn away from religion entirely. If God allowed this horror, if prayer didn't stop the dying, then what's the point? You meet people who openly mock the church, who declare that there is no God, or if there is, he's either powerless or cruel. These blasphemous views, which would have been unthinkable before the plague, are now openly expressed. You fall somewhere in between. You still attend church occasionally, mostly for your wife who finds comfort in the rituals. But you no longer believe in a loving, just God. If God exists, he's distant and indifferent, letting humanity suffer without intervention. Survivors also carry physical reminders. You have scars from your buboes, puckered flesh in your armpits and groin. Others have missing fingers or toes lost to gangrene. Some lost eyes, noses, ears to the septicemic form of plague. These disfigurements mark survivors, identifying them as those who faced the disease and lived. There's an odd status in being marked. Other survivors recognize each other, form a sort of informal fraternity. You've noticed that when negotiations labour or conducting business, revealing your plague scars can work in your favour. It proves you're immune, that you're safe to be around, that you've faced death and emerged stronger. But the scars are also constant reminders. You can never forget what happened. Every time you dress, undress or bathe, you see them. Every time someone stares, you're reminded of the worst period of your life. Children born after the plague grow up in a world shaped by trauma. They hear stories of the death years, tales that probably grow more horrific with each telling. They grow up with parents who are overprotective, anxious, suspicious of the world. These children are safer in many ways. Better hygiene practices, earlier response to illness, more careful quarantine procedures, but they're also growing up in a society that's fundamentally afraid. The plague has rewritten the social contract. Before, society was held together by complex networks of obligation, tradition, and authority. After, it's held together by pragmatism and fear. People cooperate not because it's right or proper, but because cooperation increases survival chances. This makes society in some ways more efficient, but also colder, more transactional. The warm community bonds that existed before, neighbours helping neighbours out of genuine care, extended families supporting each other unconditionally, have frayed. Now help usually comes with expectations of reciprocation. You feel this in your own life. You help your neighbours, but you keep careful track of who owes whom. Your wife assists with childbirths, but expects payment or trade. Your children play with other kids, but in a guarded way, ready to retreat at the first sign of conflict. The sense of shared humanity that should unite survivors is tempered by the memory that during the worst times, people abandoned their own families to save themselves. You saw fathers flee from sick children. You saw spouses lock dying partners out of homes. You saw people steal from plague houses while bodies were still warm inside. These memories don't fade. They shape how everyone interacts, creating a society that's more individualistic, more self-interested, less trusting. The plague killed millions, but it also killed something less tangible. The belief that people are fundamentally good, that communities will support each other in crisis, that there's meaning in suffering. What remains is a harder, colder world. A world where survivors do what they must to protect their own, where compassion is a luxury, and where the primary lesson learned is simple: trust no one, rely on yourself, and always be prepared for the worst. You don't like this new world, but you've learned to live in it, because ultimately, that's what surviving means. Chapter 13. The Second Wave and Beyond. Just when you begin to believe the plague is truly over, it returns, not as devastatingly as the first wave. There simply aren't enough susceptible people left, but it returns nonetheless. A ship arrives from Venice carrying infected crew. A merchant travels from Paris with fleas in his luggage. A family harbours the disease unknowingly and spreads it through their neighbourhood. This happens in the fall of 1348, about a year after the initial outbreak. You're working at the docks, which have partially reopened, when you hear that deaths are rising again. The familiar dread returns. Not this, not again. But this wave is different. People respond faster. The moment someone shows symptoms, they're isolated. Entire households quarantine themselves voluntarily. The city implements strict regulations. Ships must wait offshore for 40 days before unloading cargo. Travellers are questioned, examined for symptoms and turned away if there's any suspicion of illness. These measures, crude as they are, help. The second wave kills hundreds instead of thousands. It's still tragic. Every death is tragic, but it's manageable. The city doesn't collapse. Society bends but doesn't break. You and your family remain safe. Your immunity from the first infection protects you. Your wife and children, who never caught plague despite the exposure, seem to have natural resistance. Or maybe they're just lucky. You don't question it too deeply. The plague becomes endemic. It never fully disappears. Every few years there's an outbreak, sometimes small and localized, sometimes larger, spreading through multiple neighborhoods before being contained. People learn to live with this reality, just as they live with other common diseases. You develop a routine for plague outbreaks. At the first report of deaths, you stock up on food. You limit your family's movements. You avoid crowds. You watch for symptoms constantly. When the outbreak passes, you gradually resume normal activities. It's exhausting, this constant vigilance. But it's also normal now. Children growing up in the post-plague world don't know anything different. Your daughter, now 10, accepts periodic lockdowns the way earlier generations accepted winter storms. Unpleasant but inevitable. The economic changes that began during the first outbreak accelerate over the following years. The scarcity of labour fundamentally alters the balance of power between workers and employers. You experience this firsthand. In 1349, 2 years after the initial outbreak, you're approached by a merchant who needs someone to manage his warehouse operations. Before the plague, this would have been a position reserved for someone with connections, education, formal training. Now, he's offering it to you, a former dock worker, because you're reliable, competent, and most importantly, alive. The pay is substantial, more than you ever imagined earning. You accept immediately, though part of you can't quite believe this is real. You, managing a warehouse, making decisions about inventory and shipping, supervising other workers. Your wife's status rises similarly. She's become the primary midwife for your entire district. Women seek her out specifically, willing to pay premium rates because she's experienced and, crucially, has survived plague. There's a belief, not entirely unfounded, that plague survivors are safer to be around. By 1350, your family has moved to a better house. Not a mansion, those are still beyond your means, but a proper 2-story building with separate rooms, glass windows, and a real floor instead of packed earth. Your children each have their own bed. There's a dedicated kitchen area. You even have a small garden. This upward mobility is common among survivors. The rigid class structure that existed before the plague has loosened. Not broken entirely. Nobles are still nobles, peasants are still peasants, but there's more fluidity. Capable people can rise, incompetent nobility can fall. You hear stories that illustrate this shift. A former serf who fled his lord's estate during the plague learned carpentry and is now a master craftsman employing several apprentices. A merchant's daughter who inherited her father's business and is running it more successfully than he ever did. A peasant who bought abandoned land for almost nothing and is now a prosperous farmer. The church complains constantly about these changes. Priests preach sermons about the proper social order, about knowing your place, about the sin of pride. but their words ring hollow. Everyone has seen that death makes no distinction between high and low. The plague was the great equaliser, and society can't unknow that lesson. Labour laws are passed trying to suppress wages and keep workers in their traditional positions. The English Parliament passes the Statute of Labourers in 1351, forbidding workers from demanding wages higher than pre-plague levels. Similar laws appear across Europe. These laws are massively unpopular and largely unenforceable. Workers simply ignore them. If an employer won't pay competitive wages, workers go elsewhere. There are always opportunities. The labour shortage is too severe for legal threats to overcome economic reality. You violate these wage laws every time you negotiate payment. You don't feel guilty about it. You lived through hell. You survived when millions didn't. You deserve fair compensation for your work. The idea that you should accept poverty wages just to maintain some antiquated social order seems absurd. Tensions rise between workers and the traditional power structures. You sense revolution brewing, though it will take decades to fully manifest. The peasant revolts that will sweep Europe in the coming generations are being born in these post-plague years, as workers realise they have power and aren't willing to surrender it. The plague continues its periodic visitations. 1361 brings another major outbreak, though not as devastating as the first. This one seems to particularly affect children and young adults, those who weren't exposed during the initial epidemic and therefore lack immunity. Your children fall ill during this outbreak, both of them within days of each other. The terror you feel is indescribable. You thought you'd escaped. You thought your family was safe, but here they are, burning with fever, developing the telltale buboes. Your daughter survives. The buboes on her neck drain, the fever breaks, and after 2 weeks of agony, she recovers. She'll bear the scars for life, but she's alive. Your son doesn't make it. He's 12 years old. He dies on the 5th day of illness, the septicemic form of plague turning his extremities black before his small body finally gives up. He's conscious almost until the end, looking at you with frightened eyes, trying to understand why this is happening to him. You hold him as he dies. Your wife is on the other side of the bed, gripping his other hand. Your daughter, recovering but weak, watches from the doorway. The moment his breathing stops, something inside you breaks. You've seen thousands of deaths. You've carried countless bodies. You've become numb to mortality in ways that would have been unthinkable before the plague. But this is different. This is your child, your boy, the one who used to bring you flowers he picked from between cobblestones, the one who asked endless questions about ships and stars and why the sky is blue. The burial is simple. There's no elaborate funeral, no priest's lengthy sermon. Just you, your wife, your daughter, and a handful of neighbours standing around a grave. Your son's body, wrapped in a sheet, is lowered into the ground. Someone says a prayer. You throw dirt onto the shroud, each handful feeling like you're burying part of yourself. Your wife doesn't cry. She's beyond crying. She just stares at the grave with empty eyes, looking like she's already partially dead herself. Your daughter cries for both of them, sobbing against your chest with the heartbreak of a child who's lost her only sibling. The weeks after are dark. Your wife stops speaking almost entirely. She goes through the motions of daily life, cooking, cleaning, working, but it's mechanical. The light that returned to her eyes during the recovery is extinguished. She's a ghost inhabiting her own body. Your daughter throws herself into work helping you at the warehouse, helping her mother with midwifery, doing anything to avoid being still, because stillness means thinking, and thinking means remembering, and remembering is unbearable. You understand. You do the same thing. Work from dawn until dark. Exhaust yourself physically so you're too tired to dream. The nightmares had lessened over the years, but now they're back with renewed intensity. Your son appears in them, his blackened fingers reaching for you, asking why you didn't save him. Months pass. The acute grief doesn't fade, but it becomes something you can carry. You learn to function around the hole in your life where your son used to be. You learn to talk about him in past tense. You learn to smile again, though the smiles never quite reach your eyes. Your wife eventually returns to something resembling herself. Not the same, she'll never be the same, but functional. She throws herself into midwifery with renewed intensity, as if saving other women's babies can somehow balance the loss of her own child. Your daughter grows up faster than she should. By 14, she's mature beyond her years, capable and competent. She's learned that life is fragile and love is temporary. These aren't lessons children should learn. But the plague doesn't care about should. The years roll on. 1369 brings another outbreak. 1374, another. 1382, another. The Black Death becomes a fact of life, returning every decade or so to cull the population. Each outbreak is less severe than the first, but people die nonetheless. Friends, neighbours, colleagues. The death never fully stops. You grow older. Your body, damaged by years of hard labour, and the lingering effects of your own plague infection begins to fail. Your back aches constantly. Your joints swell in cold weather. You develop a persistent cough that reminds you uncomfortably of those first days of plague symptoms, though it's just age and worn lungs. By 1380 you're in your 60s, ancient by medieval standards. Most people who survive to your age are wealthy, spared the physical toll of manual labour. You're a rarity, a working-class survivor who made it past 60. Your daughter has married. Her husband is a merchant's son, a good match that would have been impossible before the plague shifted social hierarchies. They have 3 children, 2 of whom survived infancy. You're a grandfather, though one of your grandchildren carries your lost son's name, which brings both joy and pain every time you hear it. Your wife is still alive, still working occasionally as a midwife, though her eyesight and hands aren't what they once were. She's softer now. The hardness that the plague instilled has worn away slightly. She smiles more. She laughs sometimes. The grief over your son never disappeared, but it coexists with other emotions now. Love for your daughter and grandchildren, satisfaction in the life you've built, even occasional moments of contentment. You often think about that morning in 1347 when you woke up with no idea what was coming. That version of you, young, strong, naive, seems like a different person. You couldn't have imagined surviving what you survived, couldn't have conceived of the world you now inhabit. Europe is fundamentally changed. The population, which was around 75 million before the plague, has dropped to perhaps 50 million. Some regions lost even more, half or 2/3 of their populations. Entire towns are abandoned. Farmland has returned to wilderness. The landscape itself looks different. But from this devastation, something new is emerging. The labour shortage has created economic opportunities. Workers have rights and bargaining power. Technological innovation accelerates because expensive labour creates demand for labour-saving devices. Education spreads because literacy and numeracy become economically valuable. The Renaissance is coming, though you won't live to see it. The printing press will be invented in a few decades, spreading knowledge in ways that would have been impossible before. Universities will expand. Art and culture will flourish. The modern world, in some sense, is being born from the ashes of the Black Death, but you don't think in those terms. You think about the cost, the millions of dead, the children who never grew up, the families destroyed, the trauma embedded in an entire generation. The world may be changing for the better in some ways, but the price was almost too high to comprehend. You sit in your house on winter evenings, your wife beside you, watching your daughter play with your grandchildren. These moments of peace feel stolen, miraculous. You survived. Your family survived, mostly. You have shelter, food, even modest prosperity. It's more than most people got, more than you had any right to expect. The plague took so much, but it didn't take everything, and that, you've learned, is what survival means. Not emerging unscathed, nobody emerges unscathed, but enduring despite the scars, continuing despite the losses, finding reasons to keep living even when death has touched everything around you. Chapter 14. The Legacy. By 1385, you're approaching 70 years old. You've outlived most of your generation by decades. Your body is failing in the ways bodies fail. Weak lungs, arthritic joints, eyes that can barely see in dim light. But your mind remains clear, and that clarity becomes both a blessing and a curse, because you remember everything. You remember the world before. This is what sets your generation apart from those born after. Young people today have only known the post-plague world. To them, the periodic outbreaks are normal. The reduced population is normal. The social mobility and higher wages are normal. But you remember different. You remember when cities were crowded, when labour was cheap, when the social hierarchy seemed permanent and unchangeable. You remember when people didn't flinch away from each other's touch, when churches overflowed during services, when death was common but not omnipresent. Your grandchildren sometimes ask you about the plague years. They've heard stories, of course. Everyone has stories. But they want to hear them directly from someone who was there. So you tell them, though you edit the worst parts. They don't need to know everything. You tell them about the ships arriving at the port, about the first deaths, about the fear that gripped the city. You tell them about the symptoms, the buboes, the fever. You show them your scars. You tell them about the bodies in the streets, about the burial pits, about working on the death carts, about watching neighbours die, about losing their uncle, your son, whose name one of them carries. You don't tell them about the smell, about the rats feasting on human flesh, about families killing each other over scraps of food, about the mob violence and the pogroms, about finding bodies that have been rotting for weeks, about the despair so deep it felt like drowning. Some things don't need to be passed down. Some memories should die with those who experienced them. Your oldest grandchild, a girl of 12, asks you once, "Were you scared?" You think about this carefully before answering. Every single day, you tell her, "I woke up scared. I went to work scared. I came home scared. Fear was like a second skin I wore for years." "But you survived," she says. "Yes, I survived. But that wasn't always certain. And many people who were braver, stronger, better than me didn't survive. I lived because I was lucky, that's all." She seems dissatisfied with this answer. Young people want to believe survival is about skill, about worthiness, about deserving. They don't want to hear that it was mostly random chance. But you've lived too long to lie about it. The city has rebuilt itself, though it's not the same city you knew as a young man. The population has stabilised at perhaps 60% of pre-plague levels. Some neighbourhoods were abandoned entirely, their buildings torn down for materials. Other areas were expanded and modernised. Trade has resumed, though the routes and partnerships are different. Some trading centres that survived with minimal losses became dominant. Others never recovered. Marseille is doing reasonably well. It's still an important Mediterranean port, but it will never reclaim its former preeminence. The social changes that began during the plague years have solidified into new norms. The labour shortage has persisted for decades, keeping wages high and giving workers continued bargaining power. Serfdom is weakening across Europe as peasants flee to cities or negotiate better terms. You see this in your own family. Your daughter's children will have opportunities you never dreamed of. Education, choice in occupation, the possibility of rising even higher socially. The rigid barriers that defined your youth are porous now. The church's authority has been undermined. Too many priests died. Too many prayers went unanswered. Too many faithful suffered while God remained silent. People still attend Mass and observe rituals, but there's a cynicism that didn't exist before, a sense that the Church is a human institution with no special access to divine power. Heretical movements are spreading. Groups that question Church doctrine, that want to read Scripture in their own languages, that challenge the authority of Rome. These movements would have been crushed before the plague. Now they find audiences because the old certainties have collapsed. Technology and innovation are advancing. The labour shortage has driven investment in tools and techniques that allow fewer workers to accomplish more. Water-powered mills, better ploughs, more efficient looms. These aren't dramatic changes, the Industrial Revolution is still centuries away, but they're laying groundwork. The intellectual climate is shifting too. Universities are growing. Ancient texts are being rediscovered and translated. There's a hunger for knowledge, a sense that understanding the natural world might provide protections that prayer couldn't deliver. You don't fully understand these changes. You're a warehouse manager, not a scholar. But you feel the shift happening, a fundamental reordering of European civilization that began with death and is producing something new. The plague still returns periodically. 1390 brings another outbreak, smaller than previous waves but still deadly. You watch it happen with the detachment of someone who's seen it all before. The familiar patterns, the panic, the flight, the bodies, the recovery. It no longer surprises you. Your immunity remains. You're one of the lucky ones whose body remembers the initial infection and protects you decades later. You can move through plague-stricken areas without fear, helping where needed. Your wife finally succumbs to illness in 1392. Not plague, she remained immune like you, but some other ailment. She develops a fever in winter, worsens rapidly, and dies within a week. She's 68 years old, which is remarkable longevity for a medieval woman. You bury her next to your son. The funeral is well attended. She delivered half the children currently living in your district, and their families come to pay respects. You stand at the graveside, dry-eyed, because you've cried all the tears you have over the years, and you think about the girl you married before the plague. How young you both were. How naive. How unprepared for what was coming. But you survived it together. That's worth something. Your daughter wants you to move in with her family, but you decline. You're not ready to give up your independence yet. You continue working at the warehouse, though at reduced capacity. You still contribute. You're not dead yet. Your daughter worries about you living alone. What if you fall? What if you get sick? She asks. Then I fall or get sick, you tell her. I've survived worse. She doesn't have a good answer to that because it's true. You survived the Black Death. After that, what's left to fear? The years pass slowly now. You feel time moving differently than you did as a young man. Days drag on, weeks blur together. You're waiting, though you don't say this to anyone. Waiting for your body to finally give up. Waiting to join your wife and son. But your body, damaged as it is, persists stubbornly. You make it to 1395, then 1396, then 1397. You're in your late 70s, which is almost unheard of. People point you out in the streets. There's the old man who survived the first plague. You've become a living relic, a connection to a world most people only know through stories. Young scholars occasionally seek you out, wanting to document your memories. They ask detailed questions about the plague years. What you saw, what you experienced, what you remember. You answer as best you can, though your memory isn't what it once was. Dates blur together, events merge. But the essential truth remains. It was horrible beyond description, and somehow you lived through it. One evening, as you sit alone in your house, you think about what you'd tell your younger self if you could send a message back to that morning in 1347. You'd tell him the obvious things. Avoid the docks when sick ships arrive. Isolate quickly if symptoms appear. Take care of your family above all else. But you'd also tell him things you only learned later. That the plague doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you more aware of your fragility. That survival is mostly luck, not virtue. That the world after will be different. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. That the pain never fully fades, but it becomes bearable. That life continues even after unimaginable loss. Most importantly, you'd tell him to appreciate the ordinary moments. Breakfast with family, walking through crowded streets, the simple fact of being alive and healthy. Because those moments are precious and temporary, and, once they're gone, you'll spend decades wishing you'd savoured them more. But you can't send that message. Time moves in one direction. The young man you were is long gone, replaced by this old man sitting alone in the darkness, carrying memories that will die with him. You close your eyes and let yourself remember your wife as she was before the plague. Young, laughing, full of plans for a future that never came to pass. Your son as a toddler, chasing pigeons in the square. Your mother-in-law who died in the first days. The neighbours whose names you've forgotten but whose faces remain clear. All the ghosts that inhabit your memory. The Black Death took millions of lives, but it also took something less tangible. Innocence, hope, the belief that the world was stable and comprehensible. Everyone who lived through it was changed. Society was changed. History was redirected onto a new course. You're one of the last people who can remember both worlds, before and after. When you die, that direct connection will be severed. The plague will become history instead of living memory. But for now, you're still here, still surviving, still carrying the weight of everything you've seen and experienced. And somehow, that seems fitting. You survived the Black Death, surviving the aftermath, the memory, the aftermath's aftermath. That's just what you do. You're a survivor. It's who you've been for 50 years. It's who you'll be until the end. Epilogue. Looking forward. You die in your sleep in early 1398, just a few weeks shy of your 80th birthday. Your daughter finds you in the morning, lying peacefully in bed, looking more at rest than you had in decades. She weeps. Of course she weeps. But there's also relief. You've been in pain for so long. Now you're free. The funeral is small but respectful. Your grandchildren carry your coffin. The priest speaks about your long life, your survival, your contribution to the community. You're buried next to your wife and son, reuniting the family that the plague scattered. Your daughter inherits your house and modest savings. She's comfortable financially. Her husband's merchant business is thriving. and she continues her midwifery practice. Your grandchildren will grow up with opportunities you could never have imagined. The oldest grandchild, the one who asked if you were scared, will become a scholar. She'll study at a university, learn Latin and mathematics, and eventually write a history of the plague years based partly on your stories. Through her work, fragments of your experience will survive centuries. The middle grandchild will become a successful trader, building on connections his father established. He'll travel throughout Europe, seeing cities you only heard about: Paris, London, Rome. He'll witness the continued transformation of European society in the plague's aftermath. The youngest, carrying your son's name, will become a physician. He'll study the new medical texts being translated from Arabic, learning approaches to healing that would have seemed miraculous in your time. He won't be able to cure plague, that will take another 5 centuries and the development of antibiotics, but he'll help people nonetheless. Your family line continues. By the time the Renaissance fully blooms in the 1400s, your descendants will be part of the emerging merchant class. By the time Columbus sails to America in 1492, they'll be established and prosperous. By the time the Black Death finally begins to fade in the 1600s, they'll have spread across Europe. In this way, you achieve a kind of immortality, not in your own life, which was ordinary and difficult, but through the lives you made possible. Your survival during the plague years ensured that these future generations could exist. The Black Death killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. The social, economic, and cultural changes it triggered helped end the Middle Ages and usher in the early modern period. But behind those massive historical forces were millions of individual stories like yours, people who woke up one morning with no idea their world was about to collapse, who watched loved ones die, who made impossible choices, who survived through luck and stubbornness, who carried their trauma for decades, who rebuilt lives from ruins. History remembers the plague as dates and death tolls, but for those who lived through it, it was mornings spent burying children, evenings wondering if tomorrow would bring fever, years of hunger and fear and grief, moments of unexpected joy amid horror, small victories that felt monumental, losses that never healed. You survived the Black Death. That simple statement contains multitudes: the terror, the pain, the endurance, the cost. You didn't survive unscathed. Nobody did. But you survived. And in the end, that's what this story's about. Not the disease itself, though that's important. Not the historical changes, though those matter too. But the simple, difficult, occasionally heroic act of continuing to live when everything seems designed to kill you. You were a dock worker, a father, a husband, a survivor, an ordinary person caught in extraordinary circumstances who did what ordinary people do, the best they could with what they had. The plague ended, life continued, the world changed, and you were there for all of it. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for your story. Rest now. You've earned it.